So I want to welcome to the program Joseph Backholm. He is the Executive Director of the Family Policy Institute of Washington. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, Joseph. So I was teeing up the program here, and I was talking about the challenges that lots of folks have today. You know, when we face situations in our lives where it's like, is it time for us to stand up or not? It's kind of hard to stand up for your faith, and when it goes against the flow or the spirit of the times in which we live, and yet there's something inside of us when it comes to this issue of gender and identification of one's gender and how that relates to bathrooms and schools and showers and things like this. It's just kind of like, what's happening in this world? So Joseph, you're here to help us out today to kind of sort through the, let's say, are we insane or are we real, and what can we do about it? So Joseph, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Joseph, first just give us a little bit of background, because I know lots of folks have been hearing about things happening, first of all, in the state of Washington, and now, lo and behold, on Friday the 13th, our president, Barack Obama, releases some kind of letter that seems to take what we were wrestling with here in the state of Washington, and we've heard about in other states. Now it seems to have gone around and become a national issue. So help us get our bearings.
Yeah, well, what happened in Washington is actually quite similar to what happened in Washington, D.C. now, where last December we had a commission who kind of circumnavigated the legislature and decided that they wanted to open up every bathroom in the state, and this is schools as well as public accommodations, to people based on their gender expression and gender identity. And then, as you mentioned, last Friday, despite years of failed attempts to add sexual orientation to the non-discrimination law at the federal level, which would have opened up bathrooms legislatively, the president finally decided he was frustrated with the legislative process enough, and he wrote a letter and told everybody that despite the fact we haven't been able to get Congress to do what we want to do, you're going to do it anyway. And so there's a couple issues with this. One is the process that's being used to make radical changes to state and national policy. Even if you like the policy, you should really be concerned about the process, because we have a constitution that dictates how these things happen. But notwithstanding the process, the outcome of this is really troubling, because that's exactly what it does. Is it has told every business, every school in Washington state, and now the entire country, that unless you allow men into the women's bathroom or boys in school into the girls' locker room to undress in front of them or watch them undress, it's illegal, and you're going to face legal repercussions.
And so, Joseph, see, this is the thing. I was trying to explain this to my daughters, 14 and 13. Two of them, they were with me, and they're like, Dad, you're going to be talking with Joseph. I mentioned talking with that guy. We went to that dinner, and I'll mention that a little bit later, a week ago. And they said, Dad, what is this all about? And I said, well, if there's a boy that you know at your school who showed up and said, you know what, today I have a sense of gender expression. I feel like I'm a girl, then that boy biologically has a right to go into the girls' bathroom. And they were like, oh, what? That's crazy. Now, again, I know there were some people who are like, it can't really be that simple. It can't really be that plain. Is it?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, because if you talk to proponents of the bathroom rule, what this does is it allows people to access whatever facility they want based on their gender expression and gender identity. And they always focus on the gender identity part of this. And we kind of have this picture in our mind of what it means for somebody to have a different gender identity. And some people have undergone gender reassignment surgery, and for decades they have been living as a different gender than what they were born. And that's kind of the stereotypical and more sympathetic scenario. But the reality is these protections also apply to gender expression. And gender expression, by its very nature, is temporary. It's what we used to refer to as cross-dressing. And this entire movement, there aren't just two genders. There are somewhere between 55 and 62 different genders that they have identified. So people can be one, both, either, or neither if they want to. And the expectation now is that culture and schools and businesses will make the transitions with them from day to day, and anytime they want to go someplace, they have a legal right to do so. And the problem with that is not just simply that it's weird and it's uncomfortable, but the problem is it's easily exploited by people who have bad intentions. And Washington has over 200,000 sexual offenders who are registered, which means there's a lot more who aren't registered sex offenders. And all you're doing is giving those individuals a license to be pregnant. I mean, to be present, not pregnant, present in a place where they don't belong simply by declaring themselves to be female, either permanently or temporarily. And that's why this is irresponsible policy. Nobody really cares where people go to the bathroom.
So this commission from the state of Washington, their Human Rights Commission that released this new policy statement, they have in there a paragraph that identifies what would happen when a person who self-identifies with a gender expression that isn't their physical, biological makeup. So we have a guy who says, today my self-expression is as a girl or a woman. I want to go into the woman's bathroom. That this paragraph in there is saying things like, well, you really can't go challenge that person. You can't go talk to that person and say, what are you doing in here? You can't even make that person feel uncomfortable that they're in the biological identified gender that is not there visibly expressed. I'm using the word now. See how it's easy to stumble around these things, and it's like, is that really true?
That's it, for public accommodations. That provides new rules about what constitutes illegal harassment. And some of the things described as being illegal harassment for businesses to engage in are things like asking unwelcome questions about one's gender identity or sexual orientation. And it also includes using the wrong pronoun. So if there's somebody that you know to be biologically male and they ask you to refer to him as she, it is illegal for you to use the male pronoun to refer to that person. And so it's, in one sense, it's mandatory lying, or you're required to accept that person's, in your language, their concept of themselves. Now, one could easily make the argument that it's the polite thing to do, and maybe you make that transition with them out of courtesy. But the idea that it's illegal not to do that because you have a principled view about what gender is really problematic.
And you know, Joseph, and I'm talking about Joseph Backholm from the Family Policy Institute in Washington here. Joseph, we love all people. They all have the dignity of being God's children, right? And so that's where we want to begin. We want to love these people where they're at and yet invite them on a path where they can flourish as human beings. And yet we live now in a society where these policies and rules seem to have like the tail wagging the dog. That's the way it comes across, because the number of people that this would seem to apply to compared to the open door it seems to allow seems to be radically disproportionate. Am I getting that right?
You're absolutely right. You know, it's 1 in 1,000 or 3 in 1,000, depending on what number you look at. The number of people who experience gender dysphoria is very small, and so it is a unique problem. But the challenge that we're faced with is it's not even the people with gender dysphoria who want these rights. There's a giant political lobby that raises a lot of money on this and stands to gain a lot of influence over your life by doing this. And really, if they're willing to meddle in your bathroom and tell the local school districts where they have to allow boys to go and tell the girls that they have to be okay with that, there's very little in the world they're not willing to meddle with. And so there is an element of this is just a desire to control you, because this wasn't a big problem. Transgender people had been using bathrooms for generations, and they had been using the bathroom that they identified with for generations without much trouble, because most of them do it entirely appropriately. So it's not the fact that transgender people use the bathroom that is the concern. It's this rule and what it does by opening up all sorts of opportunities for people to be places they don't belong and harm people who need to be protected. That's the problem.
So really what we're talking about here is we're loving people where they're at and saying, look, you know, you have dignity as a child of God, but what we're talking about is privacy and safety. These seem to be really the big concerns that this policy is opening the door to.
Yeah. That's a great point. And Tom, I want to say that we do want to be considerate and we want to be conscientious of the feelings that people who experience gender dysphoria have. And those are real. And they are people made in God's image who deserve our compassion and our respect. At the same time, your daughters my daughters, the daughters in everyone's high school, are also people made in the image of God who have real feelings that deserve protection and respect. And the appropriate thing to do when feelings come into conflict is not to just have the federal government or the state government decide you win and you lose, but it's to have a conversation and balance those interests so that people come to understand each other and reach a resolution where really everybody is understood and is heard, and everybody's interests can be protected. But what we've done right now with this radical reinvention of kind of how we view privacy and kind of decency and modesty laws is we have ignored the supermajority of the population who doesn't experience this, but is super uncomfortable having people of the opposite gender watch them undress. And that's really inappropriate, because your daughter's feelings are just as important as the feelings of the kids in our schools who might experience gender dysphoria.
And Joseph, I want to move towards what we can do about this, but before we go there, I want to refer to something that you have brought out in a way that is a bit humorous, but also quite stunning through a couple of videos that college kids say the darndest things. And it really has to do with this philosophy, right? Ideas have consequences, and this modernistic or contemporary philosophy that has identified gender not with biology, not with a way that we Christians and Catholics would take a look and say, God created us male and female, and it's visible to see. That it has somehow been reduced back to one's own consciousness, one's own subjective self-identification, right. And how young people today have embraced this relativistic philosophy, even to the standpoint that they get placed into situations where they're faced with making a statement that's irrational or intolerant. And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And if you do want to see the videos, you can go to YouTube, or it's College Kids Say the Darndest Things is where you'll find it. And of course, it's a play on kids who say the darndest things. But it turns out as you get older, sometimes you continue the pattern. But really, what we did is we wanted to just test the logic of this identity movement. And what does this mean to say that I can be what? Not only do I have the right to be what I want to be, but I have the right to compel you to change your behavior to accommodate my new claimed identity that may or may not be permanent. And what we discovered is that the social pressure around this issue is so strong that before they're willing to be, quote unquote, judgmental and say, no, you can't be that, the kids at the University of Washington, at least, they were willing to say that I was Chinese, that I was a woman, that I was 6'5", that I was 7 years old, that I should be able to enroll in the local first grade. They were willing to accept all of those things before they were willing to say, no, you're not Chinese, you're not 6'5", you're not 7 years old. And it's just this weird thing that has happened in higher education, because I know in kindergarten classes in Washington State, they wouldn't have a problem with these questions. But in college classes, we've been trained so well to be inclusive and tolerant, and that I think the result is our minds have become so open that our brains have fallen out, and we forgot the fact that there is reality. Some things are true, some things are false, and it's good for us to recognize those things. And when we recognize something that is not true, not only is it appropriate, it's the compassionate thing to do, to tell somebody, actually, that's not true, and let me help you see what reality is, because we all flourish when we conform to reality.
I like that. And you know, unfortunately, that word judgment only has a negative connotation, but really philosophically, it just means that my mind conforms to what is real.
Right. Think about the word discrimination, which is maybe the most negative term you can use, is, say I'm a discriminating person. But very recently in history, that used to be a compliment, that you're a discriminating person, which means you show good judgment and you make good decisions based on proper things. And so in some ways, we need to reintroduce the idea that making judgment on the right grounds and on the right basis and in the right reason and in the right ways is actually one way that the human species preserves itself. And it's the way we stay alive, is because we make good decisions by accurately interpreting the information that we receive from the world around us to do things that are helpful for us and other people. So the idea that we just don't do anything because it would be discriminating is, I think we've seen that's gone a little too far.
Yeah, it's a great sadness to me, because the truth will set us free, right? Christ told us that, taught us that, and we also know that when we live in accord with what is real, we'll flourish as a human being.
Right.
But when we say, no, this is what's real in my mind, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to start flourishing as a human being. You're just not going to.
Right.
And so that's a great sadness, not only for us as individuals, but for us as a community. And I think that's what we're facing here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, that as created beings with a created purpose, we flourish when we achieve our created purpose, and we can look to nature to see what something is designed for, and the difference between when my mind doesn't conform to my body. Well, your mind was designed to change, but your body was not designed to change. So what's going to bring the greatest happiness? When you change your body to be consistent with your mind, or when you change your mind to be consistent with your body? And the design of each of those things is the greatest hint to which of those outcomes is going to be the best for the individuals involved. And the science, in fact, bears that out as well, that gender transition, gender reassignment surgery, does not bring the mental peace that one would hope it would if the real stress and conflict was because of this their body.
Yes. I'm talking with Joseph Backholm. He's with the Family Policy Institute of Washington, fpiw.org. I want you to go to the website. You can learn a lot more about the important work Joseph is doing there, including about this commission's policy statement and what we can do about it. And that's what it is we want to take timely action, because there's a lot at stake here. If there's not a lot at stake, then we don't have to worry so much about it. But if there's something at stake, then we're called upon to recognize and respond to that. So Joseph, help us understand what you're doing and how you've been able to gather a coalition of folks who have a common cause with you on this to be able to address what really are concerns about privacy and safety.
Yeah. I am fortunate now to be working with a network of people from all over Washington State on an effort. It's called Just Want Privacy. And as the name suggests, it's a network and coalition of people who just want privacy. In the bathrooms, in the locker rooms, in their shower facilities, wherever they are. And justwantprivacy.org is the website, and justwantprivacy.org is the name of the committee. And we are working to put Initiative 1515 on the ballot. And what we need is 325,000 signatures by July 8th. Now, that's a lot of signatures, and it's not a lot of time. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we are hoping everyone will come join us in this effort. And what you can do, if you go to justwantprivacy.org, we have a map there with over 100 regional petition centers. So wherever you are in Washington State, you are close to a regional petition center that has a stack of petitions. And what we hope you'll do is that you'll look up the one that's closest to you at justwantprivacy.org, that you'll go pick some up, you'll take some home with you, you'll take some to church with you, you'll take some to a baseball game with you, you'll sign it yourself, you'll get your family to do it, and you'll have a few, you'll have your friends and your fellow parishioners sign it with you as well, because there are far more than 325,000 people in Washington happy to sign this. They just have the opportunity. And so we're asking everybody to pitch in, do their part, and make sure that this gets on the ballot in November so that we can reclaim our right to privacy and also reassert our authority as the people who are ultimately the ones that need to make decisions of this magnitude.
Joseph, I think back on the times that we as a church have stood up, we as individual believers and citizens, right? We want to be good citizens. We want to be faithful citizens. And there have been a number of attacks against religious liberty, whether it was what I always referred to as Lie 1000 or I-1000. I called it death without dignity, way back in, I think it was 2008. And then we had Referendum 74 on defending marriage, and we had that. And again, these were attempts for us to say, as citizens, we can't just presume that Judeo-Christian vision of the world and those core values and how we're going to live our lives are going to be preserved in law and protected by the various policies that come from that law. And we're seeing it again.
No, you're right about that, and there's a couple things I want to mention. There is that you just mentioned I-1000 and R-74, and what people might immediately occur to people is that we lost both of those efforts, and that might be discouraging. And there's two things here. Is one, it's always the right thing to do to stand for truth, but secondly, we're going to win this. The polling on this is super strong. It's about a 75% issue in Washington state of people who believe that it's completely reasonable, completely appropriate to recognize privacy rights by having separate facilities for men and women. So if we get it on the ballot, we're going to win. But the hard part is going to be getting it on the ballot. Because right now we don't have the money to pay for signature gatherers, which is what most campaigns depend on to get an initiative on the ballot. So we are depending on you, we are depending on me, and everybody, watching and listening today to be part of this effort. Because we can do this. There's literally millions of people in Washington state who will vote for this when given the chance. We just have to give them a chance by doing the work necessary before July 8th.
So Joseph, they're going to be able to find the initiative itself on justwantprivacy.org.
Right.
But for those who aren't there, maybe they're listening on the radio right now or watching us online or listening to a podcast, give us the content of the initiative so that folks understand what it is they would be signing up for.
It does three simple things. The first thing it does is it repeals the open bathroom rule that the Human Rights Commission imposed on the state last December. And the second thing it does is it removes the liability that businesses currently experience if they attempt to enforce a male-female bathroom locker room facility. And so we don't think it's appropriate that if I were to go to 24-Hour Fitness and walk into the girls' locker room by expressing myself as female today, that the owner of 24-Hour Fitness could be liable for trying to stop me from going in there and protecting women's privacy. It would be wholly inappropriate for me to be able to drag them down to Olympia and say, you need to explain yourselves. It's a reasonable thing to do. They should have the right to do it. They shouldn't face liability for doing so. So we want to remove the liability for businesses so they can operate in a way that serves the public interest and serves their customers responsibly. And then the third thing it does is require all schools to maintain gender-specific facilities. We think that school locker rooms should not be places of social experimentation. We think that parents in Washington have an expectation that when they send their kids to school, they will not be dressing or undressing in front of kids of the opposite gender. So we think this requirement is consistent with those expectations. It does not tell any business what they have to do with their bathrooms. If Target, wants to have an open bathroom policy, we think they should have the freedom to do so, and we have the freedom not to shop there. But it does require schools to honor the expectation that parents have to respect the privacy of schools by maintaining separate facilities.
Well, and Joseph, I think we've even begun to see, just since Friday, right? Friday with President Obama putting out this letter, that it's already begun to have a pretty significant response in just a very short period of time, where some states are balking, saying, we're not going to follow this, or we're going to sue. And this is not something that it has room in our state. I think that that's a sign of the way in which we should recognize that, rational people with common sense recognize there's a better way to deal with this issue than imposing a policy in some kind of blanket way.
That's right, and ultimately, this is a test of what kind of a nation we want to be. Are we ruled by a monarch who gets to make decrees and tell us that we have to open up all our bathrooms, or are we a government of, by, and for the people? And what the president did on Friday, essentially, was extortion. He told every school district in the country that I'm going to intentionally harm the quality of your children's education by removing resources from it, unless you consent to having boys undress in front of your daughters in the school locker room. Now, it is illegal, but it should be highly offensive to every parent that our president would try to extort the public into surrendering their rights in that way. And I think the only appropriate, the only American response to that is no, we're not going to put up with that. And if we have to get new leadership, then we do. But he is not our king, he is our president, and ultimately they work for us. So it's a time, for us to assert ourselves as the public and say, that's a bridge too far.
Well, Joseph, and again, I'm talking with Joseph Backholm, and you can learn more about the wonderful work of the Family Policy Institute in Washington by going to fpiw.org, fpiw.org. And again, we've been talking about Initiative 1515, which is going to overturn, or hopefully that's the goal of it, to overturn the policy of this Human Rights Commission from the state of Washington that opens up facilities based on someone's gender identity or gender expression. as well as protects our schools to be able to maintain boy and girl locker rooms and bathrooms, and it allows businesses to remain free from liability. And when I hear that, Joseph, it's kind of like, is it really true that a gym that has a workout area and has a men and a woman's locker room, that today, you're saying that today, on the books is a policy that if a man walked into the woman's locker room and that person, out of a sense of genders, he identified himself in this way that says this is his expression, and he was harassed because of that, that gym today could actually experience legal liability.
Yeah, that is the status quo. We actually heard a story just last week from a young woman who was at her gym in Seattle, and she relayed the story of walking into the gym after her workout to change and seeing a fully naked man in there, and she immediately turned around and walked out, believing that she had walked into the wrong locker room, only to discover that she was in the correct one, and that this naked man was between her and her locker. So she quickly went by to go get her stuff, and she walked around the corner and discovered that in the corner of the locker room were a group of women huddled away, trying to get away from the naked man in their locker room. But none of them did anything about it because they all believed they couldn't, because he had a legal right to be there. And after he'd gotten dressed, he wasn't presenting as a woman. But we have now totally disempowered women, where they now feel like they have to just put up with a naked man in their locker room. And that is the status quo. And the fact is, if the owner of that gym had asked him to be removed, that man could have filed a complaint against them, and they would have been forced to go down to Olympia and explain themselves if he said, no, I had a legal right to be there because I'm expressing as a woman today.
It's so striking, and it's just like, okay, I remember, like, okay, when we had the Obamacare rules come into play, and all of a sudden that was offensive to the moral code of Catholics, that we were called upon to stand up for religious liberty. And we had a small number of efforts and events here in the state of Washington to attempt to say, as faithful citizens, we are not going to comply with this. And here we are years later, we're still battling in the courts that health insurance companies that have their roots in a Catholic community, that they don't want to have to apply, live in accord with those different onerous rules that involve moral standards or moral requirements that we won't comply with. And this is the world we're living in, right? And I was talking to you about this, Joseph, and you were saying, because you and I did some work together around R-74 and defending authentic or natural marriage, and you said a statement like that marriage initiative, it really wasn't about marriage, and this isn't really about bathrooms. There's a whole other thing going on here about an attempt of one group to apply its vision of life, its vision of the world, its vision of sexuality on us in a way that we should be paying attention.
No, that's exactly right. And this is, some people have talked about the marriage issue. It's not really being about marriage, but a war on gender. And we're seeing more and more that is actually true. Because when you took the position that a relationship between two men or two women is in every way the same and indistinguishable from a relationship between a man and a woman, what you're naturally saying is there's no difference between men and women. And now we're seeing that argument taken to its next step, where if there's no difference between men and women, then you can be whatever you want to be. And and so where does this go? I don't know, but ultimately we are in a battle over are male and female distinct, different, and complementary things, because we live in a culture that has pushed so hard this concept of equality. And we all in principle agree that people should be treated the same, but just because we're all equal does not mean we're all the same. And we are different in good ways and in bad ways in some ways, but we are different. And we used to, it wasn't that long ago that we were encouraged to celebrate our differences. Now we're being told we must deny our differences and otherwise, face the wrath of, inequality or injustice. And it's time that we need to, cool the jets a little bit, reconsider the premise a little bit, and understand that sometimes being different is a really good thing, because the differences that we bring to the table make us better and stronger. And so why do we have to pretend that men and women aren't actually different when any kindergartner in the world can tell you, yeah, men and women are different?
Yeah, Joseph, I think your next video should be that, are you smarter than a fifth grader? How about something like, my fifth grader is smarter than your college student?
Right. Well, we actually plan to go ask some of these same questions. We're working on that with some kindergarten classes. And I think it's going to be interesting to see. And to me, the question is, what happens between kindergarten and college? Where simple questions have simple answers in kindergarten, and suddenly by the time we get to college, we have been retrained in such a way that, asking a 5'9" guy whether he's 6'5" is suddenly a really challenging question.
Yeah, it's a question of your tolerance, right? So I'm really hoping, folks, if you're listening or watching this program, that you will go to justwantprivacy.org. You'll find out about many ways to educate yourself and things that you can do if you want privacy for yourself, for your spouse, for your children, for vulnerable adults who don't have people to advocate for them, for people who are like in that locker room or in an athletic club or wherever they are in a school today. To not have to be surprised, that you can know that it's a safe place and a private place where they have every right to expect that, and so should we. So please go to justwantprivacy.org, educate yourself, consider what you can do. There's a place there where you can download, you can put your signature on in ballot initiative 1515. There is a timeliness to these things. So Joseph, again, you said that you need to collect 325,000 signatures by July the 8th? By July the 8th, Friday the 8th. So this is something that, consider it, talk about it, and then find out what you can do with regards to this issue. This is something that is here right now, and we are called upon to do something about it.
Yeah, we need people's help, and that's the thing. Is I hope to create not a sense of fear, but a sense of urgency that if we all just kind of let somebody else do it, this is not going to get done. And none of us needs to, totally change our lives in order to get this accomplished. But we all need to chip in. We all need to help. We all need to get some petitions. We all need to take them to church, and we all do the little things. This gets done pretty quickly and pretty easily, and we'll all be happy about it. But if we get to July 9th and we just discover that we collectively just didn't put in the effort necessary to get this on the ballot, I think there's going to be a lot of frustration, because the opportunity is there for us to win this and send a message to the rest of the country that this is not healthy, that this is not right. And even in Washington State, we still retain enough common sense to appreciate the fact that we're not going to revoke our daughter's right to privacy in the name of equality.
Yeah, so I do encourage you, if you have questions about this in terms of how this is related to your own Catholic faith, go to the website, justwantprivacy.org, get the information, and bring it to your pastor, bring it to your priest. Ask him about this. Ask him what you can do and what they can do in order to be able to appropriately respond to the call of the moment. Joseph, you and I, God put us here. I don't know why God put us here. Sometimes I think it would be easier to live in central Montana where there is no internet, on a farm, with a very big wall, next to a contemplative monastery.
Yeah, a very big wall that Donald Trump had built by Mexico, no doubt. Yes.
So, but that's not our call. Our call, I look at that which makes saints, that which forges saints who actually do something for God's kingdom in this world, face resistance, trials, persecution, and suffering. And I think here in this country that there are more opportunities in front of us to be able to stand up for Christ, to stand up with the light of Christ, and that's to stand up with the truth in love, to stand up lovingly and present the truth, because this will lead to human flourishing for ourselves, for our families, and for our community.
That's exactly right. And this is a moment where we have an opportunity to demonstrate real courage. And that's a hard thing. sometimes courage, because there's sometimes a cost to standing for truth. But if we find that in the modest way we in Americans typically experience that cost, because we're not being beheaded or killed for our faith, fortunately. And while brothers and sisters around the globe are, but somebody might look at you funny, they might say something mean about you, but count it all joy when you fall into various trials, right? And Jesus promised us that discipleship was going to have a cost, and so we should expect that. We shouldn't necessarily run from it. And great is your reward in heaven when they revile and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely in my name. And I think that we can, not run from it. Don't necessarily need to go looking for conflict. But right now, they've brought this conflict to us, and our two choices are: we can just surrender our way of life and our freedoms and our family security, or we can stand up, show a little courage, arm in arm with our neighbors. We can get something done, and we can feel good about it at the end of the day, knowing that it was the right thing to do in the first place.
That's Joseph Backholm, fpiw.org, for more information about the Family Policy Institute of Washington, about the work that Joseph is leading there, as well as justwantprivacy.org. Justwantprivacy.org.
Get your signature.
Get your signatures. You can download. You can find out where the centers are, where you can get connected in, and find out more about what you can do to understand and respond appropriately to Initiative 1515. Joseph, thanks so much for taking time to be with me today on the program.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.